Installing every table in the Rio Poker Room, plays a hand and stops until all tables are done. Big hand going on right now. Eugene Tito all in. His queen 10 trailing the ace king of Steve Sanders.
Queen.
Flop is queen deuce trey. Tito with a pair of queens to lead.
Tito now a 3-1 favorite to stay alive.
7 on the turn. Tito still best.
Come on, pair the board.
Tito has to avoid a river ace or king.
River, is an ace, and in a flash, Tito's hopes are crushed. He falls short of the money.
Down and out. Steve Sanders, no worse for the wear. Eugene Tito's got to report to the rail.
This is prime time for some to be extra aggressive. Welcome back to the Rio. There is the 2009 main event bracelet that will be awarded to this year's champion on November 10th. Our defending champion is having a tough go of it here on day 6, but he's in a lot better shape than the short stack at the table, Joe Seebach.
But he looks good.
You were thinking of going all in, yeah?
Think about it. But you know, it's the main event.
Yeah.
Hate to go out like that. Although, I might be pot committed, you guys.
Yeah, right.
So think about that very carefully.
What do you got, like 230?
I don't have much. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about what I got. Don't worry about what I got, all right?
The chip leader. Over at the featured table, Dennis Phillips is talking to some of his many supporters that have flocked to the Rio once again this year.
Sorry, man.
Dennis getting back to the table just in time to play his hand.
In tournament play, if your cards are dealt to you and you're not seated at the table, your hand is dead. Dennis gets back just in the nick of time.
Action folded to Ty Tran with pocket 7s.
Tran attended Houston Community College. I believe they are the Raging Cajuns.
And he raises to 77,000. Is that a tell? Dennis Phillips, boy, is he glad he got back to the table. Pocket aces.
See, Dennis, if you kept talking to your friends, those aces would be in the muck right now. That's one of the reasons I don't have any friends.
Dennis will re-raise to 180,000. Folded to Steve Sanders, 62 years old from Tulsa, Oklahoma, with pocket queens.
Sanders owns several RV parks, and this is a bad time for pocket queens on the button.
A call.
He calls for 180,000.
He makes the call from the button.
Small blind, Joe Seebach folds, as does Peter Eastgate. Ty Tran with a re-raise to 605,000.
You know, in the old days, Lon, if somebody 4-bet it, they would have pocket aces. But these days, people will try to bluff you with a 4-bet, and Phillips is the one with the aces. It's a dream come true for Dennis Phillips here.
I'm all in.
Yep. He moves all in.
Tran cannot like the sound of that.
That's over $2 million from Dennis Phillips.
If Sanders is a reasonable man, and he looks like a reasonable man, he will muck those queens.
And he does just that. So now back to Tran. He and Dennis have jousted a number of times here.
Tran barely has Phillips covered. He can only call here if he thinks Phillips is making a once-in-a-lifetime audacious move on him.
But the 7s go into the muck, and Phillips takes the pot with aces.
Well, thank goodness we're spared the horn this time.
You spoke too soon.
The horn is back.
The horn is back. The fans are back. Dennis Phillips is back and making a memorable run, reminiscent of a year ago. Dennis Phillips in not so good of shape, getting short on chips. His pocket queens and flush draw trail the set of aces of Steve Sanders after the flop.
Sanders owns several RV parks. This is his first World Series event ever.
Dennis checked action to Sanders, bets 300,000.
It's a sticky spot for Dennis Phillips. The ace alone might scare him.
I'm all in.
Check raise all in from Dennis.
This would be for most of Sanders' chips, and of course Dennis Phillips right now at risk.
I call.
He makes the call. Dennis Phillips at risk and needing help.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, and now Dennis Phillips' hopes for back-to-back main event final tables are looking very dim.
Sanders in position to knock out Dennis Phillips. Turn card now. 4 of spades, no help to Phillips.
Dennis Phillips' amazing 2-year run is 1 card from ending. Phillips needs a club, any club other than the 4, or he is gone.
The river card is the jack of clubs. Phillips flush comes through.
Dennis living a charmed life on that one. The truck horn should have honked several times.
That hand leaves Steve Sanders crippled.
I just got lucky.
Nobody makes the November 9 without catching a little luck. And
You guys set so you can figure you guys out before you start playing.
And still nobody can figure out Darvin.
Well, Darvin rakes in yet another pot here at the feature table. What a great character he was that emerged from last year's main event.
It's why we love coming here each and every year.
Well, Darvin, there are so many great stories out there in the field, and we meet so many interesting people like Steve Sanders, who last year finished 54th as an amateur in his first ever main event. Certainly a remarkable feat. Steve wins a small pot there, but it was a pot he lost to Dennis Phillips that was the biggest win of his life.
Last year, I decided to play in the World Series of Poker.
About 54 people left, and I get involved in a hand with Steve.
I had pocket aces, and he had pocket queens.
The river card is the jack of clubs. Phillips flush comes through. That hand leaves Steve Sanders crippled.
The next hand, I was eliminated. I was in such severe pain, I went back up to my room for a few minutes, and then I took a cab to the hospital. If I had won that Dennis Phillips hand, I would be dead now.
He'd been having pains all day. He had an aortic aneurysm that, if it had busted, literally would have been a death sentence right there at the table.
My insides were getting ready to explode. They did an MRI, and they rushed me in fairly quickly. And they operated on me within an hour because the aneurysm was getting ready to rupture. And I was in intensive care for 4 days. But now I've made a full recovery.
I guess that card was meant to come for Steve's sake, not for mine. And that's just amazing.
This year, I saw Dennis and I thanked him. I told him that by rivering me with that jack of clubs that he saved my life. I don't know if he's ever had an opponent. Thank him for knocking him out of the main event.
Great to hear that Steve has made a full recovery. We wish him well in this year's main event. And right now, Steve, ironically, is tied up in a hand with a former ER doctor, Ray Muzica, who now works in the video game industry. Steve flopped a flush with a redraw to a straight flush. Muzica has a set of nines.
I hate playing against a guy who's lucky to be alive. He's on a free roll.
Sanders bet 3,000. Muzica calls. And he'll see a river card. Sanders ahead. It's another 10. Muzica rivers a full boat. He's got the check mark, and he checks. And Sanders checks and will lose.
How did Muzica check that? Muzica checked a full house. Every time Steve Sanders is beat on the river, he gets a break. The first time it saved his life. This time he saved some chips.
Well, Steve Sanders gives up the pot there, but he's trying to make a run back into the money at the main event. Let's get back over to table 2 and check in on Doyle Brunson. He is facing a raise from. We move elsewhere to pick up Steve Sanders in action on the river. You'll recall when Sanders was eliminated by Dennis Phillips last year, he went right to the hospital for life-saving surgery. Bob Law is also in the hand.
Yes, Sanders had a double aneurysm. If he had stayed playing poker, the aneurysm might have ruptured, and he could have died.
Sanders bets 7,000 on the river now to Law, who finished 91st in last year's main event, and Law lays it down. So Sanders will take that pot, and right now he sits with just about the starting stack, but this is day 2, Steve. You better get moving. These two brothers played on day 2 of the main event together, but today is the first time all 4 Mizrachi brothers are playing together. Michael's twin, Eric, in a hand right now with Steve Sanders.
There is a Mizrachi everywhere the eye can see.
Sanders checked the turn. Eric bet 6,000. Sanders with a check raise to 25,000. And Mizrachi lays it down.
Ever since Steve Sanders had life-saving surgery last year, just hours after being knocked out of the main event, he's been an unstoppable life force.
There's the young guy in the field and check in on Steve Sanders. He is all in right now after the flop. He has pocket aces against the pocket kings of Adelson Kottrup. The turn card now is an 8, and Sanders still a huge favorite.
One more little one.
Kottrup needs a king to send Steve Sanders home.
River card is another 8, and Sanders with aces up will double up.
So let's see if I understand this correctly. Sanders takes a bad beat to Dennis Phillips last year, which saves his life. And heck, he might win the main event this year. Doesn't Dennis Phillips get a piece of the prize money?
Sanders, he's all in, but his pocket aces are dominating the ace-7 of Dylan Lindy.
Sanders 54th at last year's main event, and now after life-saving surgery, hoping to improve this year.
Flop is no problem for Sanders.
I don't want to sweat.
His ace is still in the lead. Turn card gives him trips. That makes it official. He'll double up.
A remarkable 2-year run for the amateur on the free roll of his life.
Sanders, though, still in the red zone with just 134,000 chips.
Now it's refreshing to see.
All right, back in the field, we once again check in on Steve Sanders. All in, only this time he's behind with pocket nines. His opponent, Juha Helppi, has pocket queens. Sanders looking for help. He gets none on the flop.
Sanders owes his life to a bad beat he took last year against Dennis Phillips. It's all good since then.
Turn card now is a 5. No help to Sanders.
Sanders has to have a 9.
All boys down to the river.
The river card now is a 4, and that will do it. Steve Sanders eliminated from the 2010 main event.
He'll be in the ER within an hour and then back cashing again next year.
Sanders earns almost $42,000.
What a great story Steve Sanders has been.
That pot puts Helppi over 1 million chips now.
Thanks, you guys. We'll see you guys next year.
Sanders nearly lost his life while playing in the main event last year, but made it back to play the game he loves and make an impressive run here in 2010.